I want you to think about someone you know. Not a celebrity, not some billionaire you've read about. Just someone in your real life. A neighbor, a coworker, an old classmate who seems to coast through life doing the bare minimum. Someone who's been talking about the same dream for 5 years and hasn't moved an inch. Someone whose life, if you're being honest, looks almost exactly the same as it did a decade ago. Now here's the uncomfortable part. Are you sure that person isn't you? Because here's what I've come to understand after studying human behavior, psychology, and the patterns that separate people who build exceptional lives from people who don't. The gap between average and extraordinary is rarely about intelligence. It's rarely about talent. It's rarely about luck, connections, or timing. The gap is almost always the result of one deeply embedded, socially accepted, almost completely invisible habit, a habit so normalized that most people don't even recognize it as a problem. And that habit is this, the habit of comfort seeking, not laziness, not stupidity, not lack of ambition. Comfort seeking, the relentless, daily, compulsive drive to choose what feels safe, easy, familiar, and frictionless over what is necessary, challenging, and growth-producing. And today, we're going to tear this habit apart, completely, so that you can see it clearly for what it is. Because the moment you truly see it, you cannot unsee it. And when you can't unsee it, everything changes. Let's get into it. Let's start by defining what we're actually talking about. Because comfort seeking is not the same as relaxation, self-care, or healthy rest. Those things are necessary. Those things restore you. Comfort seeking is something fundamentally different. Comfort seeking is the habitual, automatic avoidance of any experience that produces discomfort, including the discomfort of growth. It's the choice to watch one more episode instead of working on what matters. It's staying in the job that bores you to death because at least it pays the bills. It's avoiding the hard conversation for weeks, then months, then years because bringing it up feels uncomfortable. It's not submitting the application because rejection would hurt. It's not starting the business because failure would be embarrassing. Comfort seeking is choosing the known over the unknown, the easy over the necessary, the comfortable over the real. And here's what makes it genuinely dangerous. It doesn't feel like self-destruction. It feels like self-protection. When you avoid the hard thing, your nervous system doesn't register it as failure. It registers it as survival. You chose the safe path. The threat was avoided. Good job, the brain says. Here's a small hit of relief as a reward. And that relief, that tiny neurological reward for avoiding discomfort, is the exact mechanism by which this habit gets reinforced day after day, year after year, until the life you're living is basically a museum of all the things you chose not to do. Psychologists call this the comfort zone, and we've all heard that term so many times it's lost its meaning. But let's get precise about what the comfort zone actually is neurologically. Your brain has a threat detection system, the amygdala, that is constantly scanning your environment for danger. And here's the thing. The amygdala cannot distinguish between a physical threat and a psychological one. The fear of being rejected by a publisher feels, to your brain, almost identical to the fear of being chased by a predator. So when you sit down to write the first chapter of your book and suddenly feel the urge to check your phone, make a snack, reorganize your desk, or do literally anything else, that is not random distraction. That is your amygdala pulling you away from a perceived threat. That is comfort seeking operating at the neurological level. And the more you obey it, the stronger it gets. Every time you retreat from discomfort, you reinforce the neural pathway that says, this thing is dangerous, avoid it. And every time you avoid it, that pathway becomes slightly more automatic, slightly faster, slightly harder to resist. This is how people end up paralyzed by things that other people do casually, public speaking, starting businesses, having difficult conversations, asking for what they want. These things feel genuinely terrifying not because they are, but because years of avoidance have trained the brain to treat them as threats. Comfort seeking doesn't just limit your growth. It actively, progressively shrinks the range of things you're willing to try. That is dangerous. And it's happening to most people right now, slowly, quietly, completely below their conscious awareness. I want to talk about how average is made, not born made. Nobody is born average. That's one of the most important things I want you to take from this video. Average is not a fixed state. Average is the accumulated result of repeated choices, specifically the repeated choice of comfort over growth. Let me walk you through how it works. When you're young, a child, a teenager, an early 20-something, you have almost no fixed identity. You're still figuring out who you are. And because you haven't fully formed yet, you're naturally willing to try things, fail at things, look stupid, get back up, try again. Watch any child learning to walk, learning to talk, learning to ride a bike. They fall constantly. They fail constantly. And they don't care because they haven't yet learned to be embarrassed by failure. That changes. Somewhere along the way, through school, through social feedback, through experiences that hurt, most people learn a dangerous lesson. That failure is dangerous, that standing out is risky, that being different invites criticism. And they begin, very slowly, to contract. They stop raising their hand when they're not sure of the answer. They stop auditioning for the lead role. They stop introducing themselves to the stranger across the room. They start coloring inside the lines, not because they want to, but because it feels safer. And over time, this contraction becomes their personality, their identity. They're just who I am. I'm not really a risk taker. I'm not great at putting myself out there. I've never been that ambitious, honestly. I like simple things. These are not personality traits. These are the verbal expressions of years of comfort seeking. They're the stories people tell to explain their shrinkage. And here's the most insidious part. Society validates this contraction. We live in a world that has never made comfort more accessible. At any moment, you can reach into your pocket and receive an unlimited stream of entertainment, social connection, validation, novelty, and stimulation. You never have to be bored. You never have to sit with discomfort. You never have to confront the silence long enough for your real thoughts to surface. Social media platforms are specifically designed, using behavioral psychology, variable reward schedules, and engagement algorithms, to keep you in a comfortable, stimulating, low-effort mental state as long as possible. Because a comfortable, stimulated person scrolls, and a scrolling person generates revenue. The same is true for streaming services, food delivery apps, online shopping. Every modern convenience is built to reduce friction between you and gratification, between you and comfort. Now, I'm not saying these things are evil. I'm saying that the cumulative effect of living in this kind of environment, where every impulse can be immediately satisfied, where every discomfort can be immediately medicated with stimulation, is a population of people who have lost their tolerance for difficulty. And a person who has lost their tolerance for difficulty cannot build anything meaningful. Because everything meaningful requires sustained engagement with difficulty. Building a business is difficult. Building a body is difficult. Building a relationship that lasts is difficult. Mastering a skill, raising children, creating art, pursuing justice, all of it is difficult. All of it requires you to stay in the discomfort longer than feels natural. When you've trained yourself through years of comfort seeking to exit every difficult experience the moment it starts to sting, you will exit every meaningful endeavor before it produces anything worth having. That is how average is manufactured. One small retreat at a time. Now I want to get specific, because comfort seeking is a shapeshifter. It doesn't always look like lying on a couch, eating chips. Often it looks productive. Sometimes it looks wise. Occasionally, it even looks like self-care. Here are the 5 most common faces of comfort seeking, and I want you to watch yourself honestly as I describe each one. This is the most sophisticated form of comfort seeking, and it's the one that catches the most intelligent, ambitious people. Productive procrastination is when you fill your time with real, legitimate tasks, organizing your workspace, reading research, answering emails, planning your schedule, taking courses, watching how-to videos, as a way of avoiding the one thing that actually matters. The writer who spends 3 hours researching literary agents instead of writing. The entrepreneur who builds the perfect logo instead of making the first sale. The person who watches 12 videos about working out instead of going to the gym. It feels like progress. It looks like hustle. but it is avoidance dressed in productivity's clothing. The giveaway is always this. The task you're doing instead of the important task is less uncomfortable than the important task. You're choosing it not because it's more valuable, but because it's safer. If you can't tell whether you're doing productive procrastination right now, ask yourself, what is the single most important task for my goal today? Are you doing that? Or are you doing the second, third, or fifth most important thing? If it's the latter, you're comfort seeking. This one is especially common among perfectionists and people with high standards. Endless preparation is the belief, held just below the surface of conscious awareness, that you cannot begin until you are fully ready, until you have learned enough, planned enough, researched enough, saved enough, experienced enough. I'll start the business when I have more capital. I'll apply when I have more experience. I'll launch when the product is perfect. I'll have the conversation when the timing is right. Here's the truth. The timing is never right. You're never fully ready. No one ever is. Every person who has ever built anything significant started before they were ready, failed in ways they didn't expect, learned from those failures, and iterated forward. Preparation has a legitimate phase. It's real and it matters. But beyond a certain point, preparation is not preparation. It is fear wearing a lab coat. It is the voice of comfort seeking telling you that you just need a little more time before you're safe to begin. The real preparation happens in the doing. The classroom of experience is the only one that gives you what you actually need. This is the most visible form, and yet the hardest for people to acknowledge because it has become so normalized. Chronic comfort consumption is the habitual use of passive entertainment and stimulation as a default state, not as intentional rest, but as the automatic response to any unstructured time or emotional discomfort. Feeling bored? Scroll. Feeling anxious? Netflix. Feeling lonely? TikTok. Feeling stuck? YouTube. Feeling like you should be working on something? Instagram. The problem isn't entertainment. The problem is using entertainment as emotional avoidance. The problem is never sitting with a difficult feeling long enough to understand what it's telling you. The problem is filling every quiet moment with noise before the quiet can reveal anything. Because the quiet, the unmedicated, unstimulated, honest quiet, is where you hear things you don't necessarily want to hear. It's where you confront the gap between where you are and where you want to be. It's where the voice that says this isn't the life I wanted gets loud enough to be uncomfortable. And when that voice gets too loud, the reflex is to grab the phone. Chronic comfort consumption isn't neutral. Every hour spent in passive consumption is an hour not spent building, creating, connecting, growing, learning. Multiply that across days and years, and you begin to understand why intelligent, talented people end up at 50 wondering why their life never went anywhere. This one is rarely discussed in self-improvement content, but it might be one of the most consequential. We are profoundly shaped by the people we spend time with, not through some motivational platitude, but through genuine neurological mirroring, social comparison, and the way proximity sets the invisible ceiling on what feels normal and possible. Comfort seeking in relationships looks like surrounding yourself exclusively with people who don't challenge you, people who share your worldview completely, people who won't ask hard questions, push back on your reasoning, or hold you to a higher standard, people with whom it is easy, predictable, and safe to exist. These relationships feel warm. They feel supportive. But there's a difference between people who support you and people who challenge you, and you need both. The people who challenge you, who see through your excuses, who believe in a version of you that you haven't become yet, who make you feel slightly uncomfortable because they're operating at a level above your current level. Those people are invaluable. And comfort seeking will systematically push them out of your life, because being around people who hold high standards creates discomfort when you're not meeting them. If everyone in your close circle thinks the way you think, earns what you earn, and aspires to what you aspire to, you have surrounded yourself with a comfort bubble, and you will never grow beyond its walls. This is the deepest and most invisible form of comfort seeking, and it operates at the level of self-concept. Identity comfort is the attachment to a fixed story about who you are that protects you from the discomfort of becoming someone different. I'm just not disciplined. I'm not the kind of person who takes risks. I've never been good with money. I'm too introverted for that. I'm a creative. I can't deal with structure. These identity statements feel like honest self-awareness. But for most people, they are excuses wearing the language of self-knowledge. They are comfortable beliefs about the self that make it unnecessary to try, because the trying is built into the identity, and the identity says it would fail anyway. The most powerful identity shift you can make is from a fixed identity to a fluid one. From I am this to I am becoming this. From I can't do that to I haven't learned to do that yet. Your identity is not a fixed object. It is a living story that you are writing with every choice you make. And when you choose comfort over growth, you are writing a character who doesn't change. A character who doesn't grow. A character who stays, page after page, exactly the same. That is not a life story worth reading. And it is certainly not a life worth living. Let's go a level deeper because I want you to understand this not just philosophically, but biologically. Because when you understand what comfort-seeking does to your brain over time, the stakes become very real. The brain operates on a principle called neuroplasticity, the capacity for neural connections to strengthen with use and weaken with disuse. Neurons that fire together wire together, as the neuroscientist Hebb famously put it. What this means practically is that your brain is literally being reshaped by the patterns of thought and behavior you repeat. When you repeatedly choose comfort over challenge, you are reinforcing a neural architecture of avoidance. You are building a brain that is increasingly skilled at identifying threats, generating anxiety around them, and executing avoidance behaviors to escape that anxiety. And every successful escape, every time the discomfort is avoided, delivers a small dopamine reward that makes the avoidance pathway more likely to be activated next time. This is the same neurological process behind addiction. The comfort habit is, functionally, a mild form of behavioral addiction. And like any addiction, it is progressive. Over time, you need more comfort to feel comfortable, and the threshold for tolerable discomfort gets lower and lower. Meanwhile, the brain structures associated with drive, goal pursuit, and deliberate action, particularly the prefrontal cortex, actually weaken with disuse. The less you practice engaging with challenge, the less equipped you become to do so. The less equipped you are, the harder it gets. The harder it gets, the more your brain flags it as threatening. The more threatening it feels, the more powerful the pull toward comfort becomes. This is not a metaphor. This is measurable neuroscience. Brain imaging studies of chronically avoidant individuals show measurably lower activity in the prefrontal cortex and higher amygdala reactivity. Exactly the neurological profile you'd expect in someone who has trained their brain to avoid challenge. The reverse is also true. People who regularly engage with challenge, who exercise, learn new skills, take calculated risks, have difficult conversations, show increased prefrontal cortex activity, greater cognitive flexibility, higher stress tolerance, and lower amygdala reactivity over time. They have trained their brains to move toward difficulty rather than away from it. And here is the critical insight. The threshold at which your brain begins to experience growth is the exact same threshold at which it begins to experience discomfort. You cannot have one without the other. Growth does not happen in the absence of discomfort. Growth is discomfort, biochemically resolved into new capability, new resilience, new understanding. When you lift a weight heavy enough to create micro tears in your muscle fibers, that is discomfort. And it is from that discomfort, that very specific biological stress, that muscle is built. Remove the discomfort, and you remove the signal that triggers adaptation. The same process governs every kind of growth: intellectual, emotional, behavioral. Learning a new skill is uncomfortable because your brain is forming new pathways. Having a difficult conversation is uncomfortable because it requires emotional regulation under pressure. Starting something new is uncomfortable because you're operating without the safety of competence. All of it is growth trying to happen. And comfort seeking is the habit of blocking it at every turn. I want to pause the clinical framing for a moment and talk about something more personal. Something that I think is the real cost of this habit. Not the missed promotions or unbuilt businesses, but something deeper. The real cost of comfort seeking is the slow erosion of belief in yourself. Here's how it works. Every time you set an intention, I'm going to start waking up early, I'm going to work on my business this weekend, I'm going to have that conversation this week, and then choose comfort instead, something happens beneath your conscious awareness. A tiny ledger is being kept. Your brain, specifically the insula and the anterior cingulate cortex, regions associated with self-perception and self-evaluation, is tracking the gap between who you say you are and who you actually show up as. And every time that gap widens, a little more of your self-concept erodes. You don't always feel this consciously, but it manifests. It manifests as a vague, background dissatisfaction with your life that you can't quite name. As a subtle but persistent sense that time is passing and you're not doing enough with it. As a quiet embarrassment when someone asks what you've been up to and you realize you don't have a good answer. It manifests as the avoidance of conversations about ambitions, because your ambitions haven't moved in years and bringing them up feels painful. As the low-grade anxiety of knowing you're capable of more but not doing anything about it. As the bitterness of watching people around you grow while you remain static. Over time, the comfort habit doesn't just limit what you do. It fundamentally changes how you see yourself. It shifts your self-concept from someone with potential to someone who used to have potential. And once that shift happens, once you stop seeing yourself as someone capable of significant growth, the habit becomes self-fulfilling. Why try? The brain asks. You tried before and you always end up back here. This is what psychologists call learned helplessness, the state in which repeated negative outcomes, or in this case, repeated non-outcomes, teach a person that their actions don't produce meaningful change. And once learned helplessness sets in, even genuinely achievable goals start to feel impossible. I want to be very clear, this is not a permanent state. It is not a fixed personality type. It is a learned pattern, and learned patterns can be unlearned. But it requires understanding what you're dealing with. It requires seeing the habit clearly enough to make different choices. And it requires something else too, something that I think is the real antidote to all of this, and that we're going to talk about now. The antidote to comfort seeking is not suffering. It's not self-punishment. It's not asceticism or denial or the glorification of pain for its own sake. The antidote is what the Stoic philosophers called voluntary discomfort, the deliberate, intentional practice of choosing difficulty, and specifically choosing the difficulty that produces growth. Let me break this down practically. You cannot fix what you cannot see. So the first step is brutal, honest self-inventory. Sit with a blank page and ask yourself, what have I been avoiding? Not the superficial stuff, the real stuff. What decision have you been putting off? What conversation have you been delaying? What project have you been not quite starting? What behavior have you been meaning to change? Write it all down. Be ruthless. Be specific. The goal is not to shame yourself. The goal is to map the territory because you cannot navigate what you cannot see. Now look at the list and ask, what is the discomfort I'm trying to avoid in each of these? Rejection? Embarrassment? Failure? The discovery that I'm not as capable as I hope? Conflict? Loss? Name the fear underneath the avoidance. Because when you name it, it becomes concrete. And concrete fears can be examined, evaluated, and, critically, disproportioned. Most fears, when examined honestly, are significantly smaller than they appear from a distance. Here is one of the most powerful cognitive reframes I know. What if discomfort is not a signal to retreat, but a signal that you're in the right place? What if the anxiety you feel before sending the cold email is not telling you don't do this, but rather this matters to you? That's why it's scary. What if the resistance you feel before sitting down to write is not evidence that you're not a writer, but evidence that you care deeply enough about the work to be intimidated by it? What if the discomfort you feel before the hard conversation is simply the feeling of growth trying to happen, and the discomfort itself is the price of a more honest, more real version of your life? reframing discomfort as data, as information about what matters to you, what you care about, where growth is available, fundamentally changes your relationship with it. It stops being something to escape and starts being something to engage with. The discomfort of the gym tells you where you're weak. The discomfort of learning tells you what you don't know yet. The discomfort of a difficult conversation tells you what's true between two people that hasn't been said yet. All of it is useful. All of it is growth trying to speak. Voluntary discomfort is a skill, and like all skills, it improves with deliberate practice. The idea is simple. Every day, deliberately do something that is within your capacity but outside your comfort zone. Something that your comfort-seeking brain would prefer to avoid. Something small enough that you can do it consistently, but real enough that it produces genuine discomfort. Cold showers, public speaking, physical training, fasting, reaching out to someone you respect and admire, writing and publishing something personal, saying no when you want to say yes to avoid conflict, sitting in silence without your phone for 20 minutes. The specific practice matters less than the principle. You're training your nervous system to tolerate and ultimately welcome discomfort. You are rewiring the association between discomfort and danger into an association between discomfort and growth. And here's what happens when you do this consistently. Your threshold shifts. The things that used to feel terrifying start to feel manageable. The things that used to paralyze you start to feel merely challenging. The whole range of what is possible for you expands. Not because the world got easier, but because you got more capable. The Stoics did this deliberately. Marcus Aurelius, one of the most powerful men in the ancient world, would periodically eat simple food, sleep on a hard surface, and go without luxuries. Not because he had to, but because he wanted to maintain his tolerance for difficulty. He wanted to know, always, that his happiness was not dependent on comfort. That's the goal. Not misery, not martyrdom. Just the quiet, unshakable knowledge that you can handle more than your instincts claim you can. When you're about to make a comfort-seeking choice, when the pull to avoid is strongest, use the October 10th 10 rule before you act. Ask yourself, how will I feel about this decision in 10 minutes? In 10 months? In 10 years? The comfort choice almost always wins at the 10-minute mark. Of course it does. In 10 minutes, avoiding a hard thing feels like relief. Choosing the easy path feels fine. But at 10 months, the picture looks different. The person who made the difficult choice 300 times over 10 months has grown. They have a body, a skill, a business, a relationship that's more honest, a sense of self-respect that wasn't there before. The person who made the comfortable choice 300 times has exactly the same life, with slightly more entertainment consumed. At 10 years, the divergence is staggering. The October 10th 10 rule is not about making every choice miserable. It's about zooming out long enough for the real consequences of comfort seeking to become visible. Because the real consequences are almost always invisible in the moment, and that invisibility is exactly what makes the habit so hard to break. You cannot reliably outrun your environment through willpower alone. Your environment is more powerful than your willpower on most days. So instead of fighting your environment, redesign it. Make the comfortable choice harder to access. Make the difficult choice easier. The phone goes in a drawer during work hours, not silenced in a drawer. Put the gym bag by the door. Block the apps that pull you into passive consumption during the hours you've set aside for creation. Put the book on the pillow. Make healthy food the first thing you see when you open the fridge. Schedule the hard conversation before you can talk yourself out of it. Every friction you remove from the growth choice and every friction you add to the comfort choice changes the probability of what you'll do when your willpower is low. And your willpower will be low. Count on it. That's why the environment matters. The person who wins the fight against comfort seeking is rarely the person with the most willpower. It's the person who has set up their life so that the right choices are the easy choices. I want to talk about identity again because I think this is where real change lies, not in tactics, not even in habits, but in the story you tell about yourself. There is a version of you that exists right now, in this moment, that has already made the shift. A version of you that doesn't find comfort-seeking particularly appealing. Not because they've suppressed the urge, but because they've built an identity that simply doesn't prioritize comfort above growth. This person gets up when the alarm goes off not because they force themselves to, but because there's someone who honors their commitments. They do the hard work not because they love every minute of it, but because they have decided they are the kind of person who does the work. They have difficult conversations not because it's easy, but because they believe that honesty is non-negotiable in their relationships. The goal is to become that version of yourself, not to admire them from the outside, to actually become them. And the way you do that is through what I call the identity accumulation principle. Every action you take is a vote for the identity of the person who would take that action. Every time you choose growth over comfort, you cast a vote for the identity of a person who chooses growth. Every time you honor a commitment to yourself, you cast a vote for the identity of a person who keeps their word. Every time you tolerate discomfort in service of something you care about, you cast a vote for the identity of a person who can be trusted to follow through. These votes accumulate. Over days, weeks, and months, they build an undeniable body of evidence for a new self-concept. And eventually, this is the tipping point. You stop identifying with the old story and start living from the new one. It doesn't happen all at once. It is not a dramatic transformation. It is a slow, quiet, daily accumulation of choices, each one almost unremarkable on its own, collectively producing someone who is unrecognizable from the person who started. That is the arc of every person who has ever escaped average. Not a dramatic breakthrough, not a single turning point, not a moment of perfect inspiration that changed everything. Just a decision, repeated daily, quietly, without applause or recognition, to choose growth over comfort. One day at a time, one choice at a time. I want to make this real for you. Not abstract, not philosophical. Real. Right now, today, what is your comfort habit costing you? Think about your health. If you've been meaning to get in shape for a year and the comfort habit has stopped you from going to the gym with any consistency, what has that cost you? Not just in physical terms, in energy, in confidence, in the way you carry yourself through the world. Think about your career. If you've been meaning to have the conversation with your boss about a promotion, or to start the business you keep talking about, or to make the pivot you know you need to make, and comfort has kept you where you are, what has that cost you? Not just in money, but in the quiet grief of work that doesn't align with who you know you are. Think about your relationships. If there's a conversation you've been avoiding for months, with your partner, your parents, your friend, yourself, what has that cost you? How much authentic connection has been sacrificed on the altar of temporary comfort? Think about your craft, whatever it is you feel called to make or build or express in this world. If the comfort habit has kept you consuming instead of creating, watching instead of building, planning instead of doing, how many months or years of your creative life have already passed? Now add it up, not to punish yourself, but to reckon honestly with what is at stake. Because here's the truth about time. It doesn't accumulate the way money does. You cannot save it up and spend it later. It moves in one direction, at one speed, regardless of what you do with it. And the cost of comfort seeking is not paid all at once. It is paid in small, invisible installments spread across years, and the final invoice arrives only when you look back at the life you lived. The philosopher Seneca wrote, "It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste a great deal of it." He wrote this in the 1st century. The pattern is not new, but the tools of comfort have never been more powerful, more accessible, more engineered to keep you in their grip than they are right now, in the world we live in today. You are living in the most comfort-optimized environment in human history. And that means the gap between the people who develop the discipline to choose growth and the people who surrender to the comfort default has never been wider. That gap is both a warning and an opportunity. Now I want to flip the lens, because everything I've said about the compounding cost of comfort seeking applies equally, in reverse, to the compounding benefit of consistently choosing growth. Every difficult choice you make today compounds. Every skill you build today becomes the foundation of a more capable tomorrow. Every discomfort you tolerate today expands the range of what's possible for you in the future. This is the principle of compound growth, and most people understand it in financial terms, but completely miss it in personal development. Here's what it looks like in practice. The person who decides at 30 to consistently choose growth over comfort, to exercise when they don't feel like it, to work on their craft every day, to have the honest conversations, to take the risks, to build the skills. That person at 40 is not just 10 years older than who they were at 30. They are exponentially more capable, more confident, more resilient, more connected, more free. Because growth compounds. Each year of consistent expansion builds on the last. The skills, the relationships, the financial resources, the mental clarity, the physical capability, they don't accumulate linearly. They compound. The person who consistently chooses comfort, on the other hand, is also compounding, but in the opposite direction. The comfort habit deepens. The avoidance patterns strengthen. The tolerance for difficulty decreases. The range of what feels manageable narrows. And at 40, they're not just where they were at 30. They are, in many meaningful ways, less capable, less confident, less willing to try, more dependent on comfort, more afraid of discomfort. The compound growth of consistent choosing is one of the most extraordinary forces available to a human being. And almost no one uses it intentionally, because the benefits of each individual growth choice are so small as to be nearly invisible. The daily workout doesn't transform your body today. The hour of focused work doesn't build the business today. The single honest conversation doesn't repair the relationship today. But compound them over months and years, and you're looking at a completely different life. Here's an exercise I want you to do. Imagine two versions of your life 5 years from now. Version A. You continue roughly as you are now. Same patterns, same habits, same level of comfort seeking. Where are you in 5 years? What's your body like? Your career? Your relationships? Your creative output? Your sense of self-respect and capability? Version B. Starting today, you consistently choose growth over comfort. Not perfectly, not dramatically, just consistently. A little more courage, a little more discipline, a little more willingness to stay in the discomfort long enough for it to produce something. Where are you in 5 years? What's your body like? Your career? Your relationships? Your creative output? Your sense of what you're capable of? The gap between version A and version B. That gap is the cost of the comfort habit, and it is almost certainly larger in both directions than you are currently imagining. Let me bring this home. The dangerous habit that keeps most people average is not stupidity, not laziness, not lack of talent, and not bad luck. It is the deeply ingrained, neurologically reinforced, socially normalized habit of choosing comfort over growth at every available moment, in every available form. It is productive procrastination, endless preparation, chronic comfort consumption, low-stakes relationships, identity comfort, the slow, daily accumulation of avoided discomforts adding up to an avoided life. And the reason it's so dangerous is not that it's dramatic. It's that it's not. It's quiet. It's soft. It feels reasonable in every individual instance. Nobody's comfort-seeking choice ever felt like self-destruction in the moment. It always felt like a perfectly sensible response to a reasonable situation. That's why it works. That's why it catches almost everyone. That's why the people trapped in it, the people watching 5 hours of television tonight instead of working on what matters, the people scrolling instead of creating, the people waiting instead of doing, almost none of them know they're doing it. But you do now. You cannot unknow this. And knowing it gives you a choice that most people don't realize they have. Not the choice to never feel the pull of comfort. That pull is biological and it will never fully disappear. But the choice of what to do with it, whether to obey it or to acknowledge it and move forward anyway. The life you want, the body, the work, the relationships, the sense of purpose and capability and honest pride in who you are. That life is not on the other side of a perfectly motivated day or a dramatic transformation or a lucky break. It is on the other side of 1,000 small choices to stay in the discomfort just a little bit longer than feels natural. It is built one unremarkable act of courage at a time. Nobody is watching. No one is keeping score. There's no trophy for choosing growth on a random Tuesday morning when the comfortable option was right there and no one would have known. But you know, and the version of you 5 years from now will know. Start making the choice today. Not because it's easy, because it's yours to make. If this video gave you something real, share it with one person who needs to hear it. Not 100 people, just one. The right person. Subscribe if you want more content like this. No hype, no shortcuts, just honest thinking about how to build a life worth being proud of. And tell me in the comments, which of the 5 faces of comfort seeking do you recognize most in yourself? Be honest. The comment section is a good place to practice that. I'll see you in the next one.